All right, today's lecture is going to be on art theft, looting, and repatriation. It is one of my favorite lectures to give throughout the semester because it's just so cool. I mean, I don't partake in art theft, I don't condone it, but there's something just really fascinating about it. It is amazing how powerful art is, to the point that people want to control it and steal it. Maybe there's even a romantic element involved, and that's definitely shown in the movie The Thomas Crown Affair. But have you ever wondered why the famed bust of Nefertiti, one of the most important Egyptian artifacts, isn't in Egypt? Instead, it's in a museum in Germany. Or even the Elgin marbles, which have adorned the Parthenon for nearly 2 millennia, aren't even in Greece. You'd actually want to go to the British Museum to see them. Art theft and looting is not anything new. It has been around since the dawn of man. The pyramids at Giza were looted. This obelisk from Heliopolis was taken by the Romans in 39 AD. Even these horses that adorn the Basilica at San Marco in Venice aren't from Venice. They were taken from Constantinople, which is the image in the lower left-hand corner of the screen. But not only were they taken from there, they weren't even originally there. They were on the Arch of Trajan, which you see at the right. So where does art truly belong? We kind of wonder why stealing art has become so popular recently. And of course, the number one answer is going to be money. Think about how expensive these paintings are. A soup can painting by Andy Warhol, that's only going to be $1 million, right? I mean, there's just a tremendous amount of money involved in art. This painting that is attributed to Leonardo da Vinci, this is called Salvator Mundi. And in the fall of 2016, it sold for $400 million at Christie's. When you add the auction tip in, that's another $50 million added to that. Besides money, we can look at how easy it is to steal art. Now, if you've never been to a museum before, you might think that security guards look like this, and you don't want to even make a wrong move. However, those of us who have been to museums can tell you that a lot of times security guards are like this. We can also have the size and shape of these artworks make them conducive to stealing. Paintings can be taken off of the wall. They can be even cut from their frames. Objects taken and put into backpacks or underneath a coat. And finally, enforcement. How many people are actually out there looking for lost and stolen art? Were you aware that the LAPD has an art theft detail? Because they do. And when I first started doing this lecture back in 2008, I called them up and found out that there was only one person staffing that department. And in 2016, I called them back because I was updating my lectures and I asked how many people were now staffing the department, and the guy told me they had doubled in size and there's just 2. But fortunately, we do have other people helping us look for lost and stolen art, such as Interpol, the International Police Agency, currently working on a list of 25,000 artworks. That's more than enough to fill any museum. We also have the Art Loss Register, which is a database of lost and stolen art. Auction houses are required to search it before putting an object up for sale. Currently, they get about a hit every 11,000 objects searched. But this database has been responsible for returning hundreds of artifacts, not only to individuals, but also to countries and cultures. When I first created this lecture, I was shocked at this statistic, that art theft is the third highest grossing criminal activity behind drugs and weapons. And I figured drugs and weapons, of course, would be first and second, but art theft is third. And that was pretty wild. Another shocking statistic is that only 10% of art is ever recovered, which means that thieves get away with it 90% of the time. Art traffickers receive about 10% of the art's true value. Now, the way I have this lecture set up is through looking at art during times of war, and then we're going to look at some individual art thieves toward the end. Now, this is the Iraqi National Museum in Baghdad, and it was looted in 2003 during the Gulf War. Within a matter of moments, you had all these wonderful artifacts being turned into souvenirs. And these are artifacts from the cradle of civilization. Many of the artworks were damaged or destroyed. And during, or I should say shortly after all these thefts, the museum did have an amnesty period where if you had stolen an artwork, you had a couple of months to turn it in, no questions asked, no prosecutions would be made. And that's exactly what happened with the story of this vase. This is the Uruk, or Warka vase. And this is an important artwork because it's the very first time we have a narrative in the history of art. So this artwork was stolen. It was subsequently returned about 3 months later, but it had been broken into 14 different pieces. And as you see here, it has been reconstructed. But where does art truly belong? Does it belong in a museum? Does it belong to the culture that created it, even though that culture may not even exist anymore? Or does it belong in a place where thousands and thousands of people can see and appreciate the art? That's one of the larger questions we have about art history now. Going back to art theft, we've got Napoleon, which we normally associate with like the French Revolution, but he was one of the greatest art thieves. Between 1796 and 1815, he and his armies looted not only Europe, but also North Africa. They took art from Austria, Poland, Belgium, Germany, Spain, and most importantly, Italy. This is the Mecca for art. We have the ancient Roman civilizations, we have the Renaissance, and this guy stole 500 artworks just from the Vatican alone. The most famed artwork that he stole was this one. This is called Laocoon and His Sons. And Laocoon was the priest who tried to warn the people of Troy, it's probably not a good idea to bring that horse within the gates. However, the gods wanted this to happen. And so they sent out a serpent to destroy both Laocoon and both of his sons. Napoleon was so pleased with stealing this sculpture. He paraded this and other war bounty through the streets of Paris. He then commissioned a set of china to commemorate the event. And when we turn the scene slightly clockwise, we see that he not only stole the Laocoon sculpture, but he stole the Apollo Belvedere, another famed sculpture from the classical age. Napoleon had an interesting philosophy about art. He said he wanted to build an appreciation in French society of foreign artists and civilizations. He said art could open our eyes to other cultures, as if to justify his stealing. But what happens, unfortunately, is about 130 years later, we have another individual who steals art, who's a military leader. And this is also a person who has a background in the arts, someone who attended the opera and theater, had joined a musical society. He was a painter, a sculptor, and he applied twice to the Arts Academy at Vienna. What a different world this would have been had he been accepted. But when we also look at who made up the board, the admissions board for the Arts Academy at that time were individuals of Jewish background, and we feel that this fueled his anti-Semitism. Now, the reason he wasn't accepted into art school was that he could not draw people very well. Most of his imagery is of architecture, it's of landscape. He was a watercolorist, and the paintings, they're not that bad, they're not that fantastic, but the problem is none of these are going to be out on display at a museum, not in our lifetime or our children's lifetime. Perhaps a couple of hundred years from now, when the collective memory of World War II has passed, these may appear. But for right now, they are in the deepest, darkest vaults of museums. Besides being the greatest murderers of all time, they're probably the most infamous art thieves. After his appreciation of Germanic art and artists, Hitler was very much a classicist, meaning he liked the classical age, Greek art, Roman art, and therefore Renaissance art as well, since they brought most of their techniques from the classical age. The buildings that he built or constructed for the 1936 Olympic Games in Berlin, his famed architect Albert Speer designed these in the Greco-Roman style. But even more important to note is that while he appreciated classical art, he absolutely hated modern art. Modern art was something that he called degenerate. That means having lost the physical, mental, or moral qualities that are considered to be normal and desirable. That this art showed evidence of decline. These are works by Impressionists, Cubists, Expressionists, Surrealists, and Dadaists. He hated these people the most. He called them, quote, insane and depraved humans. This includes some of our most celebrated artists of the late 19th and early 20th centuries. People like Camille Pissarro and Edward Munch, Kandinsky, Modigliani, Chagall, Braque, even our friend Pablo Picasso, all labeled as degenerate artists. And no one was escaped from Hitler's wrath. This work, Prophet by Emile Nolde, is one of the more famous works you'll see in art books as an example of a woodcut. But no one ever says that Emile Nolde happened to be a fervent member of the Nazi Party. But in the 1930s, he was told to stop practicing art because he was an expressionist. Others, like Paul Klee, a teacher at the famed Bauhaus in Germany, removed from his teaching post, not allowed to teach. And the Bauhaus is one of the most important art schools that has ever existed. It is a school of modernism. And when Hitler rose to power in 1933, one of the first things he did was close down the Bauhaus, calling it, quote, un-German. In 1937, he will sign the Degenerate Art Act, which allowed Nazi troops to go into Germany's state museums to, quote-unquote, cleanse them of the works that the Fuhrer deemed as poisonous. Museums didn't have a choice. They were told they had to relinquish their collections. Within a period of 2 weeks, Nazis had taken 16,000 paintings up to Switzerland, and they were sold at auction. Works included this one by Kirchner, the self-portrait by Van Gogh, and this work, Bathers with Turtle by Matisse. This work was purchased at that auction by Joseph Pulitzer Jr. And he said he bought this to protect it from an uncertain future. After the war, he would go on to donate it to the St. Louis Museum of Art. The others, they were just burned. 11,000 paintings sold, 5,000 of them destroyed. Now, this is only step one in Hitler's plan. It is to rid the world of bad art. Step two was just as nefarious, is to collect Europe's finest art treasures. Hitler would first start looting art from German Jewish families, and then once Austria was annexed to Germany, he would loot them from Austrian Jewish families. And that's the way the Nazis got control of this painting. This is the famous work, the portrait of Adela Bloch-Bauer, painted in 1909 by Gustav Klimt. And Klimt is the most famed Austrian painter in history. In fact, this painting has been nicknamed the Austrian Mona Lisa. It's about 4 foot square, done in the Art Nouveau style, and commissioned by the lady you see in the painting, Adela Bloch-Bauer. Her and her husband Ferdinand owned a total of 5 Klimt paintings, including these here. And when Adele dies in 1925, the ownership passes to her husband Ferdinand. Then, once Austria is annexed to Germany in the 1930s, Ferdinand is going to leave Austria for Switzerland, leaving his possessions behind. He's going to end up dying in exile. He's never going to come back to Austria. The Nazis take these paintings, but once the Nazis are overthrown, these paintings are not given back to the family. They are put on display at Austria's National Museum in Vienna. And this was because, according to Adela's will, she wanted them there. And for 60 years, they were on public display there. Maria Altmann and other family members in the early 2000s waged a lawsuit against Austria, asking for these paintings back, demanding them back, as they said that if Adela knew what travesties would occur during the Second World War, she would have never wanted Austria to have these paintings. So, in 2007, in a landmark case, Austria gives these paintings back to the family. They're ordered to. The family does not hang on to the paintings. They turn around and sell them at auction. And these paintings garner nearly $300 million for them. Now, this painting alone sold at auction for $135 million. At the time, it was the most amount of money anyone had ever paid for a painting. Since then, there's been a lot more money paid. Overall, I think this is around 15th on the all-time list today. But the person who bought this was Ben Lauder, who was a member of the Estee Lauder family. And for a while, he had it in his living room. Today, it is on public display. But they all used to be. And unfortunately, at that auction, these were sold to 5 individual collectors. Now, we were lucky to have these at the LA County Museum when I worked there in the early 2000s. They were on display, and I couldn't imagine people coming to see just 5 paintings in an exhibition. We had just finished the King Tut exhibition. There were, hundreds of artifacts, and tens of thousands of people came to see that exhibition. But for 5 paintings, I couldn't imagine anyone really coming to see it. But what surprised me on opening day of the exhibition is I went downstairs and I saw the line, and it wrapped around the Amundsen building twice. And it was at that point I realized how significant these paintings really were. And I eventually did get to go and see that exhibition and stand within these paintings. And it was a really fantastic experience. This painting at that auction sold for $78 million. And the person who bought it was Oprah. She's going to end up turning around and selling this painting for double her money, or nearly double, in 2017. So we're going to go back to World War II for just a moment. And so after Austria falls to Germany, so does Poland and the Ukraine, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Belgium, Holland, Luxembourg, and finally France. And France is incredibly important to us since they have the largest art collection in Europe at the Louvre. And in 1939, the administrators decide it's time to evacuate. So all of a sudden you have these paintings taken down from the wall, removed from their frames, placed into boxes, and shipped out under the cover of night in very chaotic conditions. This painting here, absolutely gigantic. This is a famous work called Maria de' Medici Arriving at Marseille. And this was one of a series of 26 paintings that Maria de' Medici commissioned Rubens to paint, legitimizing her ascent to the throne of France, even though she was Italian. Even the great victory of Samothrace had to be moved. And this sits, of course, atop the grand staircase. This is not one solid sculpture, but it is hundreds of pieces grouped together for this work. And even the curator of sculpture did not think she would hold together, but fortunately she did. The Mona Lisa, she escaped in her own climate-controlled ambulance, driven off through the streets of Paris to undisclosed locations. In fact, we do not know what happens to this painting between 1939 and 1945, when she's placed back onto the wall of the museum. But the Nazis were smart, and they uncovered a lot of these hiding places. The art was shipped back to Germany, and if it was a famous work or by a famous artist, like this one here, this is The Astronomer by Vermeer, this would have been given to Hitler himself for his private collection. Other paintings would be then set aside for Germany's State Museum. After France, Poland had the largest art collection in Europe, and that's where we find this work. This is Cecilia Gallerani, who is also called the Lady with the Ermine, and it is done by Leonardo da Vinci. It was taken to a summer house, walled up in a basement with gold artifacts, and the Nazis saw the comings and goings of the workmen at this country house. They broke in, found the newly constructed wall in the basement, tore that out, took all the gold artifacts, and tossed the painting aside. When it was found, there was a boot print on its surface. Now, the most famous painting still missing from World War II is this one. This is a self-portrait of Raphael. There's only 3 of these ever to have been completed. And the last time this painting was seen, it was January 1945 in the possession of the Nazi governor of Poland. It has not been seen since. In 2012, though, this article ran in the art newspaper saying that this painting had finally been found. It was in a bank vault. The location was undisclosed as of yet, but 2 weeks later, this story turned out to be a hoax. It was really a game of hide and seek because the Nazis thought they would be coming back for this artwork, so a lot of it was just hidden. One of the places was Castle Neuschwanstein in the Bavarian Alps. In it had just floor-to-ceiling, tons of art. When you look at today's dollar volume for the amount of art the Nazis stole, it comes to something like $28 billion. Besides hiding art in castles, they also hid art in mines. And this is an salt mine in Austria, literally a mile within the earth. They found this storehouse of art. And by the time it was emptied, it had filled up 80 train cars. Now, these soldiers here have uncovered the Ghent altarpiece, or the panels of the Ghent altarpiece. And you can see they're looking at one of them that's called the Mystic Lamb, and there are a couple panels behind them as well. Now, the Ghent altarpiece is absolutely gigantic. It is 11.5 feet tall, it's 15 feet wide, and it weighs over a ton. We have talked about the version of God there in the center in previous lectures. And in the lower left-hand panel, where you see the horse right out in front, that panel has not been recovered. That is a replica panel there today. This is the most frequently stolen work of art ever produced. It's been stolen 13 times in its 600-year existence. And the last time it was stolen was 1937 by Hitler and the Nazi Party. There are still 100,000 artworks missing from the war. And we're going to transition here to some individual art thieves, such as Thomas Bruce, who's better known as Lord Elgin. And he's like the 7th Lord Elgin. But in 1801, he was a British ambassador for the Ottoman Empire. And he obtains permission from the Ottoman authorities to purchase about half of the remaining sculptures off of the Parthenon. And the Parthenon, of course, is that fantastic temple on top of the Acropolis in Greece. The sculpture would be up at the ceiling level. It's what you see, that triangular part at the very front. That's called a pediment. And that's where the sculpture would be. The sculpture was taken to the British Museum, and you can see how they're kind of slanted down to be in that kind of triangular area. But this is the most important work of classical antiquity. The Ottoman Empire falls, the Greece government asks for these works to be returned, and the British Museum says absolutely not. We bought these fair and square, and when we really look at the historical time periods, the British Museum probably saved these artworks from destruction anyway. So they preserved them. But it's one of the hot topics we have in art history of who this really belongs to. Does it belong to the people of Greece, or does it belong to the British Museum? The British Museum says if they begin to repatriate objects, the museum itself is going to be empty. One of the people that would be asking for objects to be returned would be the current country of Nigeria. Prior to that, they were called Benin, and in 1857, during the punitive expedition, the royal house was looted, and 3,000 of these brass plaques were stolen. 200 of them have been purchased by the British Museum. Another art thief is Adam Worth. He was a head of a criminal syndicate in London during the Victorian age, and his brother John had been arrested. and Adam decided he needed a bargaining chip to get him out of jail. So he and his 2 bodyguards went over to Thomas Agnew and Sons auction house one night. The bodyguards lifted this guy up through a window, and in the darkness he found this painting called The Duchess of Devonshire by Gainsborough, cut it from its frame, and they took off with it into the night. Adam's brother John got out of jail by totally legal means. Adam didn't return the painting. He kept it. In fact, he slept with it under his bed, saying that he was entranced with its beauty. Today's dollar volume on this painting is $1.2 million. Vincenzo Peruggia is a carpenter, and this guy spent a night in a utility closet at the Louvre. On a Sunday night, he stepped into the closet. On a Monday morning, he stepped out, grabbed the most famous painting off of the wall, and walked out the front door. This guy stole the Mona Lisa. And I know it seems kind of weird today with how much we revere this painting, but back in the early 20th century, she was not as famous as she is today. And she was just on the wall with the other artworks. What makes matters worse is no one really noticed she was gone for a few hours. They thought she might have been down in conservation or having photographs of the painting taken, but around noon they decided they better call the police. The painting was gone for 2 years. Vincenzo Peruggia gets arrested for trying to sell the painting to an undercover police officer. At his trial, he says that I'm just an Italian expatriate trying to return all those works Napoleon stole centuries before. And the thing is, Napoleon never stole the Mona Lisa. This was sold by Da Vinci himself to the King of France. And then Da Vinci goes and lives in the court of Francis I for the last 5 years of his life. Stefan Breitweiser, this guy began stealing art around the age of 25 in 1995, and he stole everything. Drawings, paintings, illuminated manuscripts, sculptures, silverware, ivory carvings. By the time he's caught, he had stolen 239 objects from 172 different venues. At his trial, his quote was, "It became a compulsion. I wanted more and more, and I couldn't stop myself. I needed these objects, and they needed me." The most expensive painting he stole was this one, worth about $9 million. And he would take these paintings, cut them from their frame, and when he would get home, down the street from him lived a carpenter. And the carpenter would make him new frames, not even once asking him where he was getting these paintings from. He lived at home with his mom, and in his bedroom, he had up on the wall these artworks. And once the wall was full, he would have rotating exhibitions of them. Now, he ends up getting caught, and his girlfriend calls his mother and says that the police are headed to her house. And the mother does what any good mother would do to help protect her son. She starts to destroy the evidence. And by the time the police show up and stop her, she has destroyed 60 artworks, including this work by Boucher. Many of them shoved down the garbage disposal. Now, he serves 26 months in jail. Both the mother and the girlfriend receive 18-month prison sentences, and when he gets out, he writes his book, Confessions of an Art Thief. Now, he has been arrested multiple times since then. In fact, this is his third arrest in February of 2019, so he just can't learn his lesson. But sometimes we don't know who steals the art. In this case, this is a painting or a study for a painting by Chagall. And in spring of 2001, it's stolen from the Jewish Museum of New York. And it winds up in a postal sorting station in Topeka, Kansas. The value of this painting is over $1 million. In 1994, the Scream is stolen, and this is one of the more famous art thefts. It happens at the National Gallery in Oslo, and this is the same day of the opening Olympics in Oslo. The thieves left a note in its place thanking the museum for the poor security. The painting was recovered 9 months later without any damage to it. Now, the Scream is actually a series of 4 paintings, and the second version was also stolen about a decade after the first. In 2004, the thieves stole not only the Scream, but another painting by Munch, which is his version of the Madonna. These paintings were also recovered 2 years later. In 2006, the thieves, by the way, they were caught on camera escaping in their black Audi station wagon. When the paintings were recovered, though, they had both been damaged. The lower left-hand corner of the Scream was damaged, and that's water damage there. And then on the right-hand side of the Madonna, we have some rips and tears. With this painting here, this is almost like a scene from a movie. The Madonna with the Yarnwinder, attributed to Da Vinci and valued at over $60 million, was hanging on a wall in Drumlanrig Castle in Scotland. 2 gentlemen taking the tour that day grabbed the painting off of the wall, jumped out a window, ran across the castle grounds and escaped. 4 years later, it winds up in a locker at a train station in Glasgow. But sometimes these paintings are not recovered. We're still looking for Matisse's Luxembourg Gardens and Gérôme's Pool in the Harem. This one's valued at $1 million. Maxwell Parrish's Vanderbilt murals, they're worth $2 million each. Andrew Wyeth's Moon Madness, that's a $3 million painting. Henry Morris Reclining Figure, $5.6 million. And I give the thieves props on this. Not only did they steal the sculpture, they stole the flatbed in order to steal this sculpture. And this is right on the grounds, the estate of the artist. Most likely it's been melted down for scrap metal. Audrey's White Duck, valued at $8 million. Caravaggio's Nativity Scene, $20 million. Rembrandt's Storm on the Sea of Galilee, his only seascape. Vermeer's The Concert. Vermeer only completed 37 paintings. This is also considered to be priceless. And Manet's Chez Tortoni. Manet is the father of modern art. Also a priceless painting. And you'll notice that these last 3 paintings were all stolen on the same day, March 18th, 1990. That's the day that the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum was robbed. It's the largest art theft on American soil. And on that night, two police officers show up to the museum. The night security guards let them in, and of course they were not police officers. They handcuffed the night security guards to pipes down in the basement, and for 81 minutes they have full reign over the museum, taking only 13 works. But these 13 works also have an insurance value of $500 million. They have yet to be recovered, and it's been 30 years now. Some great books written about the Gardner Museum heist. We also have some books on art theft. And if you want more information about the Isabella Stewart Gardner heist, the Last Scene podcast is an excellent series showing all about this heist. And with that, that's going to conclude our lecture on art theft.